In the brutal winter of 1885, the Arizona Territory was a place where survival meant making impossible choices, where one wrong decision could mean death for an entire family, and where the line between civilization and wilderness was as thin as morning frost on desert sand. It was a land where Apache warriors and white settlers had been locked in a deadly struggle for over 30 years, where trust between races was as rare as water in the desert, and where acts of mercy were often repaid with violence. Tom McKenna had carved out a modest cattle ranch in the high country southeast of Tucson, a harsh but beautiful landscape of rolling hills covered with oak trees and seasonal grasslands that could support livestock when the rains came. At 41, Tom was a weathered man with calloused hands and gray threading through his brown hair, a veteran of the Civil War, who had come west seeking peace and a chance to build something lasting in the unforgiving frontier. On the morning of December 15, 1885, as the first major blizzard of the winter howled across the high desert, Tom McKenna made a decision that would test every principle he held dear about humanity, justice, and survival. He found a young Apache warrior collapsed outside his barn, burning with fever and dying from what appeared to be pneumonia, a disease that could easily spread to Tom's own family. If you're ready to discover how one act of compassion in the dead of winter would unite two enemies and change the course of Arizona Territory history forever, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell, because this story will restore your faith in the power of human kindness. The storm and the blizzard struck the Arizona high country with a ferocity that caught even experienced ranchers by surprise. Tom McKenna had seen plenty of harsh winters during his 4 years working the land southeast of Tucson, but nothing quite like the storm that began on the evening of December 14, 1885, and showed no signs of abating as dawn broke gray and bitter the next morning. Tom's ranch, the Broken Spur, sat in a natural basin surrounded by oak-covered hills that usually provided excellent protection from the worst weather. But this storm seemed to be coming from every direction at once, driving snow horizontally across the landscape and creating drifts that threatened to bury his outbuildings entirely. As Tom made his way from the horse barn back toward the house for a quick breakfast, something caught his attention that made him stop dead in his tracks. Near the corner of his main barn, partially hidden by a snowdrift, was what appeared to be a human form. Tom's first instinct was caution. In Apache country, a figure lying near ranch buildings could be a trap, a wounded enemy, or simply another victim of the brutal weather. But as he approached carefully, his Winchester rifle ready but not aimed, he could see that whoever this was had been there for some time and posed no immediate threat. The figure was clearly a Native American, probably Apache based on his clothing and the distinctive style of his hair ornaments. He appeared to be young, perhaps in his early 20s, with the lean build typical of Apache warriors. But this was no raiding party scout. This was a man who was obviously dying. The Apache was unconscious, his breathing shallow and labored, his lips blue with cold, and his entire body shaking with violent chills that had nothing to do with the temperature. When Tom knelt beside the stranger and felt his forehead, the heat was unmistakable. The man was burning with fever despite being half frozen from exposure to the storm. Tom McKenna faced a decision that would define not only his character, but potentially the survival of his family and ranch. Apache warriors were considered enemies by most Arizona settlers, and harboring one could be seen as an act of treason by territorial authorities. More practically, the young man was clearly suffering from some kind of illness that could be contagious, but Tom had not survived the Civil War and 4 years of frontier ranching by ignoring his instincts about human nature. Whatever this young Apache had been before collapsing outside Tom's barn, he was now simply a human being in desperate need of help. Tom made his decision quickly. He lifted the unconscious Apache and carried him toward the ranch house through the driving snow. "Mary," Tom called out as he kicked open the front door, "I need help. And get the children away from the fire." Mary McKenna was a frontier woman who had learned to handle emergencies with calm efficiency. But the sight of her husband carrying an Apache into their home tested even her considerable composure. "Tom, what in God's name are you doing?" she asked, though she was already moving to clear space near the fireplace. "Found him dying outside the barn," Tom replied as he gently laid the Apache on the floor near the fire. "He's burning with fever and half frozen at the same time." Sarah and James McKenna, 8 and 10 years old respectively, stared wide-eyed at the Apache warrior who had suddenly appeared in their living room. Like most children in the territory, they had been raised on stories about Apache raids, but they had never seen an Apache up close. "Is he going to hurt us, Papa?" Sarah asked in a whisper. No, sweetheart, Tom replied. He's too sick to hurt anyone. Mary had been examining the Apache while Tom talked to the children. He's got pneumonia, or something very much like it, Mary said quietly. His lungs sound terrible, and that fever is dangerous. But I don't think it's anything immediately contagious like smallpox. Over the next several hours, as the blizzard continued to rage outside and the Apache warrior drifted in and out of fevered consciousness, the McKenna family worked to save the life of someone their neighbors would have considered a mortal enemy. Mary prepared broths and herbal remedies designed to break the fever and ease the congestion in the young man's lungs. Tom kept the fire burning steadily and helped turn their patient regularly. Even Sarah and James contributed, fetching water and blankets under their parents' supervision. Late in the afternoon, as the storm finally began to show signs of weakening, the Apache opened his eyes and looked directly at Tom McKenna with an expression of confusion, wariness, and something that might have been gratitude. Where am I? The young man asked in heavily accented but clear English. You're in my home, Tom replied carefully. You collapsed outside my barn during the storm. My wife and I have been trying to help you recover from what appears to be pneumonia. The Apache studied Tom's face intently, as if trying to determine whether he was dealing with friend or enemy. You are Thomas McKenna, he said after a moment. The one they call Honest Rancher. Tom was startled to hear his name spoken by an Apache warrior. You know who I am. The young man managed a weak smile. My people, know all the ranchers in this country. You have never cheated Apache traders. You have never joined posses hunting our people. Some say you can be trusted. What's your name? Tom asked. I am Nate, the Apache replied. I am nephew too. Geronimo. I was traveling to meet with army officer about treaty talks, when the sickness took me the revelation that Tom was harboring not just any Apache warrior, but a member of Geronimo's family, and apparently some kind of diplomatic messenger. Added an entirely new dimension to the situation. Treaty talks? Mary asked. Nate nodded weakly. Geronimo is ready to discuss peace, but he needs assurance that Apache people will be treated fairly. I was carrying message to army post when the sickness came. The next 3 days, as Nietzsche slowly recovered from his bout with pneumonia, the McKenna family learned more about Apache culture and current political situation than most settlers would discover in a lifetime. Despite his youth, Nate possessed a sophisticated understanding of the complex forces that were reshaping the American Southwest. Nate explained that he was not just Geronimo's nephew, but had been chosen as a diplomatic messenger because of his ability to speak English, his knowledge of white customs, and his reputation for honesty among both Apache and military leaders. My uncle grows old, Nate told Tom during one of their evening conversations. He has fought for more than 20 years. He is tired of war, but he will not surrender unless he knows his people will be treated with dignity and respect. Mary McKenna, who had initially been terrified at the prospect of having an Apache warrior in her home, found herself fascinated by Nature's descriptions of Apache family life, spiritual beliefs, and survival techniques. Apache women are the decision in most family matters, Nate explained to Mary. They choose their husbands, they control the household resources, and they have significant influence in tribal councils. Sarah and James McKenna gradually became curious about Nature's stories of life in the desert, his knowledge of animal behavior and his ability to read weather patterns with an accuracy that impressed even their father. Tom McKenna found himself gaining respect for Nate, not just as a person, but as a representative of a culture that had developed sophisticated techniques for surviving in one of the harshest environments on the continent. On the morning of December 19th, for days after Tom had found Nate collapsed outside his barn, those peaceful days came to an end, with a visit from 3 neighboring ranchers, who claimed to be checking on the McKenna family's welfare after the storm. Tom called out Ben Harrison, who owned the ranch immediately to the north. You folks all right in there? We ain't seen hide nor hair of you since that big storm hit. Tom stepped onto his front porch, closing the door firmly behind him to prevent his visitors from seeing inside the house where Nate was resting near the fireplace. We're fine, Ben, Tom replied. Storm knocked down some fencing, so we've been busy with repairs. Harrison was accompanied by Jake Morrison and Pete Williams, 2 ranchers who had reputations for taking a hard line against any Apache presence in the territory. Both men were studying Tom's ranch buildings with calculating gazes. Funny thing, Morrison said casually. Jake here thought he saw smoke coming from your place at odd hours. Like maybe you had extra people keeping extra fires burning. Tom felt a chill. Morrison's observation was accurate. The McKenna family had been keeping their fireplace burning continuously to help Nate recover from his fever. Mary's been doing a lot of cooking since the storm, Tom replied. Winter is a good time to catch up on household projects. Pete Williams suddenly pointed toward tracks in the snow near Tom's barn. Those look like moccasin prints. Tom, you've been having Indian visitors. The tracks were indeed from Nature's moccasins, left during his brief walks outside during his recovery. Found those tracks after the storm, Tom said. Figured some Apache had taken shelter in my barn during the worst of the weather, but they were gone by the time I checked. Harrison, Morrison, and Williams exchanged glances that suggested they weren't entirely convinced by Tom's explanations. Tom, Harrison said seriously, if you've had Apache on your property, even just passing through, you need to report it to the territorial militia. I'll keep that in mind, Tom replied, though he had no intention of reporting anything that might endanger Nate. After the three ranchers departed, Tom returned to his house to find Nate sitting up by the fireplace, clearly having overheard the conversation. I am bringing danger to your family, Nate said quietly. Perhaps it would be better if I tried to continue my journey now. Tom looked at the young Apache, who was still clearly weak from his illness. You're in no condition to travel. And besides, you haven't finished your mission yet. Mary McKenna came into the living room with a cup of medicinal tea. Tom's right, she said firmly. You stay here until you're completely well. We've managed to keep you safe this long. That evening Nate made an offer that would prove crucial to everything that followed. Thomas McKenna, he said formally, you have shown me kindness when you could have left me to die. You have risked your family's safety to help someone your neighbors consider an enemy. This is not something Apache people forget. He paused before continuing. When I am well enough to travel, I want you to come with me to meet my uncle. Geronimo should know about the man who showed mercy to his nephew. Tom was intrigued, but concerned. I appreciate the invitation, Nate, but I can't leave my ranch and family unprotected. You would not be going as an enemy, Nate replied. You would be going as my adopted brother, under my protection. And you would not be going alone. I am asking your whole family to come as honored guests of the Apache people. The invitation represented an unprecedented opportunity, but it also carried enormous risks. If Tom accepted, he would be placing his family's lives in the hands of people his neighbors considered savage enemies. As snow began to fall again, outside, Tom realized that his simple act of providing shelter to a sick stranger was evolving into something that could change the history of Apache-settler relations in the Arizona Territory. The journey to UND Saresti and D'Angief, for 6 days of recovery, under Mary McKenna's careful nursing. Nate had regained enough strength to travel. During those final days, Nate shared detailed information about Apache diplomatic protocols and taught the McKenna family basic Apache phrases that would help them communicate respect and peaceful intentions. When we meet my Uncle Nate, explained, he will evaluate your family not just by your actions toward me, but by your understanding of Apache ways and your willingness to learn. Tom had made the difficult decision to accept Nate's invitation, partly because he believed it might contribute to lasting peace in the territory, but primarily because his instincts told him that the young Apache could be trusted completely. Mary, are you sure about this? Tom asked his wife as they prepared for the journey. It's not too late to change our minds. Mary McKenna looked at her husband with the steady gaze of a woman who had already made her decision. Tom, that young man, risked his life to carry messages that might end 30 years of warfare. If there's even a small chance that our going with him could help make this territory safe for all children, Apache and white, then we have to try. On the morning of December 22, 1885, the McKenna family and Nate departed the Broken Spur Ranch in Tom's wagon, with extra horses and supplies for what Nate estimated would be a 3-day journey into the Dragoon Mountains, where Geronimo's band was currently camped. The journey into Apache country proved to be both educational and eye-opening for the McKenna family. Nate served as guide and interpreter, pointing out landmarks, explaining the significance of various geographical features in Apache culture, and teaching them to read the subtle signs that indicated they were entering territory under Apache control. See those rocks arranged in that pattern? Nate asked, pointing to what appeared to be a random collection of stones beside the trail. That is a message marker, telling Apache scouts that peaceful travelers are approaching. Tom was impressed by the sophistication of Apache communication systems. What most white settlers perceived as empty wilderness was actually a carefully monitored landscape where Apache scouts tracked every movement across vast distances. On the second day of their journey, the McKenna family encountered their first Apache patrol, 3 warriors, who appeared from nowhere and surrounded their wagon with silent efficiency. Nate spoke rapidly in Apache, explaining the circumstances of his rescue and the purpose of their journey. The patrol leader, a man in his 30s, with the bearing of a veteran warrior, studied the McKenna family with intense curiosity before responding. He says his name is Chato, and he has heard stories about the white rancher who saved Geronimo's nephew. Nate translated, "He will escort us to the camp and ensure our safe passage." The final approach to Geronimo's camp revealed the extent of Apache military organization and discipline. The location had been chosen for maximum defensive advantage, with lookout points commanding views of all possible approaches and escape routes that would allow the band to disappear into the mountains if threatened. But what impressed Tom most was the normalcy of daily life within the Apache camp. Children played games similar to those his own children enjoyed. Women worked at tasks that reminded him of Mary's daily routine, and men engaged in activities that could have been observed at any frontier settlement. "Papa," Sarah whispered as they approached the camp, "they look just like regular people." "They are regular people, sweetheart," Tom replied. "They just have a different way of living than we do." Geronimo himself was smaller than Tom had expected, but possessed a presence and dignity that immediately commanded respect. At 56 years old, the legendary Apache leader showed the effects of decades of warfare and hardship, but his eyes held an intelligence and determination that explained why he had been able to evade superior forces for so long. The meeting between Geronimo and the McKenna family took place in the traditional Apache manner, with formal introductions, expressions of mutual respect, and careful evaluation of each other's character and intentions. "My nephew tells me you risked your family's safety to save his life," Geronimo said through Nature's translation. "He tells me you showed him the same kindness you would show your own son. This is not something I expected from a white rancher." Tom chose his words carefully. "Your nephew was sick and dying when I found him. Any decent person would have done the same thing. The color of a man's skin doesn't change his need for help when he's suffering." Geronimo studied Tom's face intently before responding. "Many white men speak of Christian charity and human decency, but few show these qualities when dealing with Apache people. You acted on your beliefs when it was dangerous to do so. This tells me something important about your character." Over the next 2 days, as guests in the Apache camp, the McKenna family experienced a level of hospitality and cultural exchange that would have been unimaginable under normal circumstances. They shared meals with Apache families, watched traditional dances and ceremonies, and learned about survival techniques that had allowed Apache people to thrive in desert environments for centuries. Tom engaged in detailed discussions with Geronimo about territorial politics, military strategy, and the economic factors that were driving the ongoing conflicts. What he learned challenged many of his assumptions about the causes and potential solutions to the violence that had plagued the region. "The reservation system is designed to fail," Geronimo explained. "Government officials promise food, clothing, and supplies, but these promises are broken as soon as Apache people are confined and no longer pose a military threat." Tom began to understand that Apache resistance was not simply savage hostility, but a rational response to policies that threatened the cultural and physical survival of Apache people. On the final evening of their visit, Geronimo made an offer that would test Tom's commitment to the principles that had brought him into Apache country. "Thomas McKenna," Geronimo said, speaking directly in English for the first time, "you have shown my people respect and kindness. You have learned about Apache ways without judging what you do not understand. I want to offer you something that no white man has ever been offered before." He paused to ensure he had Tom's complete attention. "I want to offer you and your family a place among Apache people, not as prisoners or adopted captives, but as equals who would be welcomed in any Apache camp throughout the Southwest." The offer was both generous and loaded with implications. Accepting Geronimo's friendship would provide the McKenna family with unprecedented security, but it would also mark them as collaborators in the eyes of other settlers. The oath of B. McKenna's decision in response to Geronimo's offer would become legendary in the Arizona Territory, but at the time it felt like the natural culmination of everything he had learned during his week with Nate and his 3 days in the Apache camp. "Geronimo," Tom said, using the Apache leader's name with respect, "I accept your offer of friendship and protection. but I want to understand exactly what that means for both our peoples. What followed was the most important negotiation of Tom McKenna's life. With Nate serving as translator, Tom and Geronimo worked out an agreement that would serve as a model for peaceful coexistence between Apache and settler communities. The agreement established Tom's ranch as neutral ground where Apache travelers would always be welcome to rest, trade, and recover from illness or injury. In return, Geronimo guaranteed that the McKenna family would be under Apache protection, with scouts assigned to monitor their safety. More importantly, the agreement established protocols for communication between Apache leaders and territorial authorities, with Tom serving as an intermediary who could help prevent misunderstandings that might lead to violence. This is not just about friendship between individuals, Geronimo explained. This is about creating a new way for people to live together in country that belongs to all of us. The old ways of pure hostility are not working for anyone. The formal ceremony that sealed the agreement took place on the morning of December 26, 1885. With the entire Apache band participating in rituals that had rarely been witnessed by non-Apache people. Tom, Mary, Sarah, and James were each given Apache names that reflected their character and the circumstances of their adoption into the extended Apache community. Tom became man who shelters eagles, honoring his decision to provide sanctuary to nature despite the risks. Mary became woman who heals with kindness, recognizing her role in nursing nature back to health. But the most dramatic moment came when Geronimo called for a demonstration of Apache loyalty that would prove to Tom the full extent of the protection he had earned. At Geronimo's signal, Apache warriors began emerging from concealment throughout the surrounding mountains. They came singly and in small groups, all mounted and armed, all moving with disciplined precision. They continued to appear until nearly 300 mounted warriors had assembled in the valley below the main camp. "These men have sworn an oath to protect you and your family," Geronimo told Tom as they watched the impressive display. "They come from different bands, some of whom have been enemies of each other in the past. But they are united in honoring the dead Apache people. Oh, to the man who saved my nephew's life." Tom was overwhelmed by the sight of 300 Apache warriors who had pledged their loyalty to his family's safety. The display represented not just individual gratitude, but a collective commitment from Apache leadership to support peaceful relationships. The journey home to the Broken Spur Ranch was accomplished under Apache escort, with scouts ranging ahead to ensure safe passage. Tom realized that he was returning as a fundamentally different person than the one who had left 2 weeks earlier. The changes began manifesting immediately. Apache travelers began stopping at the Broken Spur Ranch for rest, trade, and medical assistance, always approaching with the formal courtesy that Apache culture demanded when visiting allies. Tom and Mary found themselves serving as informal diplomats, helping to resolve disputes between Apache bands and settler communities. The first major test of Tom's new status came in February 1886, when territorial militiamen arrived with orders to search for Apache raiders. The militia leader, Captain William Hayes, was a career military officer who viewed any cooperation with Apache people as treason. "McKenna," Captain Hayes announced, "we have reports that you've been harboring Apache fugitives. I'm authorized to search your buildings and arrest anyone found to be aiding enemies." Tom had anticipated this challenge and had prepared by securing written documentation through contacts in the territorial capital. "This letter is signed by the territorial governor and the military commander," Tom explained as Hayes examined the document. "It authorizes me to maintain communication with Apache leaders for purposes of preventing conflicts." The letter was genuine, though it had required considerable effort to obtain. Tom had traveled to Tucson immediately after returning from his visit with Geronimo, convincing territorial officials that his relationship with Apache leaders could serve legitimate government interests. Captain Hayes was frustrated, but understood the importance of following proper chain of command. After examining the authorization letter and conducting a search, he departed, though not before issuing a warning. "McKenna, I don't care what letters you've got. If any of my men get killed by Apache raiders who you've been feeding, I'm going to hold you personally responsible." Over the following months, Tom's ranch became an unofficial embassy where Apache leaders and territorial officials could meet on neutral ground. The success of these meetings gradually convinced skeptical authorities that cooperation with Apache people could achieve better results than pure military confrontation. The most dramatic validation came in June 1886, when tensions reached a crisis point over false accusations that Apache warriors had massacred a family near Tombstone. Military forces were preparing for a major offensive when Tom received an urgent message from Nate. The soldiers are planning to attack innocent Apache people based on lies, Nate told Tom. The family that was killed was murdered by white outlaws who wanted to steal their land, but they made it look like Apache work. Working through his official channels, Tom arranged for Apache scouts to guide military investigators to the scene, where a careful examination revealed that the attack had indeed been staged by white criminals, rather than Apache warriors. The discovery prevented what would have been a devastating military campaign against innocent Apache communities, and established Tom's reputation as someone who could be trusted by both sides to seek truth and justice. By the end of 1886, the Broken Spur Ranch had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose cooperation over conflict. Apache families regularly visited to trade goods and receive medical assistance from Mary McKenna, who had become widely known for her healing skills. Tom's children, Sarah and James, grew up bilingual and bicultural, equally comfortable in Apache camps and settler communities. Their ability to move between both worlds made them valuable ambassadors who could help prevent misunderstandings. On the 5th anniversary of the day he had found Nate collapsed outside his barn, Tom McKenna stood on his front porch watching Apache and white children playing together in his yard, while their parents discussed business arrangements that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. Nate, now a respected leader and key figure in Apache adaptation to reservation life, had traveled from his new home to commemorate the anniversary of his rescue. Thomas McKenna Nate said as the two men watched the scene of interracial cooperation. "When you found me dying in the snow, you could not have imagined that your kindness would lead to all of this." Tom nodded, thinking about the chain of events that had begun with a simple decision to help someone in need, regardless of political and cultural boundaries. "I've learned something important over these past 5 years," Tom replied. "The most powerful force for change isn't politics, or warfare, or grand gestures. It's ordinary people making the choice to show compassion when someone desperately needs help." As the sun set over the Arizona mountains, Tom McKenna understood that his decision to provide shelter to a sick Apache had done more than save one life. It had demonstrated that enemies could become friends, that different cultures could learn from each other, and that peace was possible when people chose to see their common humanity. The 300 Apache warriors who had sworn loyalty to protect his family had become symbols of something larger than military alliance. They represented the possibility that people of different backgrounds could work together to build a better future for everyone who shared the challenging but beautiful landscape of the American Southwest. This incredible story proves that sometimes the most important moments in history begin with the simplest acts of human kindness. Tom McKenna's decision to shelter a sick Apache didn't just save Nate's life, it created a ripple effect that prevented massacres, built bridges between enemies, and showed that ordinary people can change the course of history through compassion and courage. When we choose to help someone in need, regardless of who they are or where they come from, we never know how far those ripples of kindness might spread. Share this story if you believe that showing mercy to one person can transform an entire community. Subscribe for more incredible true stories that remind us that our common humanity is stronger than any force that tries to divide us.